Welcome to the BC LaRouche chapter Saturday meeting, the 13th of August. And tonight we're going to go deeper into the implications of the development of a major shift that's going on in Turkey, coming out of the meetings that occurred in St. Petersburg, and now the meeting between Turkey and Iran. But I'm going to go deep on this. I'm not going to deal with just what they did or didn't do. I'm going to go deeper into the deeper issue. Okay. Now, you have to have this perspective. During World War II, there was an awesome economic mobilization. And at the end of World War II, the United States was the most powerful economy in the world. But Canada was the third most powerful economy in the world. That's how much industrial power existed in the small area, population-wise, of Canada. And it was connected to the industrial transformation of the United States, but it was. Now, what happened in this period from the end of World War II and the process of dismantling that productive power and the whole transformation that's occurred since 1945, 71 years, has to be looked at in the context of the developments that have occurred coming out of the shift that's taking place in Turkey. Now, what happened after the war was there was a promotion on a mass scale, beginning right after the war, going into the 50s, and then going into the rock, drug, sex, counterculture in the 60s, of cultural depravity and cultural degeneracy. And the leading institution of this in the transatlantic region was called the Congress of Cultural Freedom. And they promoted the most decadent music, the most decadent art, the most decadent literary that they could. I won't even go into what I read when I was 12, 13 years old, 14, 15 years old. It was very decadent. And this was what was coming in. Now, this cultural decadence appealed to the worst instincts in people. Sexual pleasure, psychedelic experiences, entertainment, completely away from the earlier culture, you might say, which was oriented towards progress, a better future for your children, doing something worthwhile with your life, doing something productive. That culture was smothered in waves and further waves and further waves of cultural degeneracy. And the spread of this cultural degeneration escalated after the financial system was taken down in 1971. So money became the primary goal, and money, and more money, and so forth. And as that cultural degeneration occurred, there was a counter-reaction to that cultural degeneration from the population, which is being destroyed by the cultural degeneration. And their counter-reaction was vectored into religious fundamentalism. So you have the cultural degeneration, and then you have religious fundamentalism coming side by side. Okay, now the idea of this cultural degeneration is that we don't need to have progress. We don't need to be productive. We just have to have pleasure. And you know, there are no restraints. Okay, and today you see this in the culture of the hedge fund managers, crack cocaine, all the way. You see it in the political, you know, system. You see where people are just putting in their time as politicians, but they're spending the other part of their time in their entertainment and pursuits. And the idea is there should be no impediment to you doing whatever you want to do, whatever drugs you want to take, whatever sexual orientation you want to have, or whatever changing sexual orientation you want to have, as you might wish. You know, it's all a big smorgasbord of experience. And when Angela Merkel used the term "our values," and when Obama uses the term "our values," that's what they mean by our values. They mean our values. Our values. Okay? Okay, they mean freedom. This is what George Soros means by an open society. Freedom. Freedom. And anyone, yeah, you know, that's what they mean. Now, however, outside of primarily North America, outside of Europe, there are certain impediments to the spread of this cultural degeneration, because this is the empire. This is the idea of Fukuyama, idea of the end of history. That the world is now finally has one culture, a neoliberal economics and cultural freedom. The full liberation of humanity from the tyranny of the future, the tyranny of reason, and the tyranny of having to do good. It's all a world of competition, lust for power, lust for money, lust for sex, lust for entertainment. That's our world. That's the universal new world that we are now in. The brave new world, whatever you want to call it. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is the negative, is the people who are destroyed in that become then material for the fundamentals. So you have the two things going on side by side. Now, however, the Russian Orthodox culture that's emerging after the fall of the communist system, the emerging Confucian Chinese culture, and also Muslim society in general, represent an impediment to the spread of this culture. These are traditional cultures. They are not perfect. They are somewhat imperfect, quite imperfect. But there is a resistance to this from these cultures.
And there's a direction and hope in those cultures still.
Yes, centered around family and centered around what have you. So in these cultures, so when the communist system collapsed, you couldn't spread this to the whole world. But what you could do is you could take and begin to organize the backward people, but most importantly the degenerate people, into these religious fundamentalism, and then try to use it as a battering ram. And more importantly, you can take historical issues between these different cultures and try to inflame them. Whether it's Shia versus Sunni, whether it's Turks versus Russian, whether it's Vietnamese versus Chinese, whatever it is, right? And so at the time that the wall came down, at the time that communism ended, you had something developed called the Clash of Civilizations. This is Bertrand Russell and Samuel Huntington. And what they said is that while communism is gone, we now have to deal with a world of different cultural paradigms in collision, in conflict. And now that's not true, but that was the face of the propaganda. But what they really meant was we're going to cultivate terrorism on a mass scale and set all this into motion, because this world system of depravity that they had in mind cannot really spread unless you destroy those societies, unless you destroy their morale. So all these parts of the world have in many ways been under massive psychological, cultural, and military warfare, covert military warfare, overt military, irregular military warfare, to destroy those parts of the world and take the people that have been destroyed and deploy them in different ways in Africa and so forth. And this is part about creating our values, a world of our values. Of course, depopulation as well, but it's our values. Okay? Now, at the same time that the Clash of Civilizations was being put forward, Helga and Lyndon LaRouche were putting forward, in the early 90s, the contrary concept, the dialogue of civilizations. And this concept of the dialogue of civilization is that you have these different cultures, and they have historical problems, they have historical issues with each other. But you bring a dialogue between them, not on who's right and who's wrong, but in what general area do we agree on. And the general area that we will agree on is that we all want a future. We all want something for our children. We all want economic development. Therefore, we have something we can at least have. We respect your culture because you respect my culture, not as a pantheon where you adopt mine or I adopt yours, but as the fact that we respect the fact that this is what you wish to be, but we will work with you for development. So we started this campaign back over 25 years ago, about 25 years ago, called Dialogue of Civilizations. And this was picked up by the president of Iran, Khatami, in the late 90s. And it was picked up by Yakunin a little bit later on, around the same time, late 90s. And he created the World Forum. And so this idea of bringing culture, civilizations together through a dialogue over economic development became ultimately, with the economic aspect of it, was the New Silk Road. So the New Silk Road is not just an economic idea that we put forward, oh gee whiz, the Chinese really liked it eventually and took it. No, it's a conception of bringing together a dialogue of civilizations. And a conception of man that comes out of that dialogue civilization is that we're all human. And so that is what you're dealing with now. Emerging. And a lot of people say to me, well, Paul, it's all a bunch of games, people are going to play games, etc. But this is not what you're seeing. This is profound. This is the beginning of a profound change. because the Russians and the Chinese are operating from that level. Okay, I get that sense that they're operating from a level of we respect Islam, we respect Hinduism, we respect Buddhism, we respect Russian Orthodox, we respect Christianity, we respect traditional culture, but traditional culture is not enough. You have to do something more. Okay, so you have that kind of thing going on in Russia, you have that kind of thing going on in China, and perhaps with this shift going on with Turkey, you'll start to get that kind of thing going on in the Islamic, in the Shia and Sunni branches of Islam, where they will start to have that conception. And who are the terrorists anyhow? Who are the ISIS and Al-Qaeda and these people? These are the dregs of society that have been recruited from prisons, from drug addiction. These are the malcontents. These are the people or they're the most poor in a society. And these people are recruited, and they're turned into fundamentalists. The people who have totally been devastated by the drone, their families have been devastated by the drone strike, and they go absolutely stark raving mad. They don't, they're not being recruited to something good. They're being driven mad first, and then they're being told, okay, now you got a chance, to express your rage, to express your hatred of of what's happened to you, your destruction as a person. And that's how this stuff is being done. And we reached a turning point where this kind of thing was about to take over Syria, and then it was going to be spread everywhere. And it was stopped. And once you stop that, then you have the potential to start to organize all of the forces that exist. But you have to do it from this standpoint. You cannot just say, well, you can't just say we want economic development for you. You have to approach it from this higher standpoint. And so I suspect that that's what's going on right now in the situation with Iran, with Turkey, and it's been building for some time. Now, once Turkey is no longer being used as a principal player in that area, then the entire perspective that LaRouche has been talking about since he did the video called Storm Over Asia in 1998, 98, late 98, that storm depends on ripping up the entire area from Turkey, throughout the Middle East, through all Central Asia, into past Afghanistan, into China, and down into India and Pakistan. This whole area was what has been slated to be ripped up and destroyed, and with that, destroy the entire coming together of the world around the economic development being put forward now by the Chinese and the Russians and others in the New Silk Road. That was the most serious thing that was going on. And Erdogan, for whatever reason, was on the wrong side. And whether he finally realized it, whatever took place inside Erdogan's head, I have no idea. But the shift that's going on, I fundamentally believe, is real. It's not a game. Okay? He is angry. He feels betrayed. And he is a Turk. And this thing is going to go fast. And Turkey's economic existence is going to flourish profoundly from this. So is Iran. So is the whole region. And now the potential exists to clean up the terrorist apparatus in that area. So you can expect the terrorists, as they're being cleaned up, to be moved to other areas all over the world. to be used because they didn't create these terrorists for no reason. The Obama administration, the Bush administration, the Anglo-Dutch, Canadian, U.S. system didn't create all of this for the last 20 years for no reason. They intend to use it, and they will use it. But they're going to have trouble using it, more and more so. It's going to backfire on them. The Chilcot report, the 28 pages, all the things that are now starting to occur. So, so they have their values. Their values. That's what they represent. Complete degeneracy, complete nihilism, and then the byproduct of that is for the people that collapse in that is fundamentalism. And that can only be dealt with from this higher standpoint. And I suspect strongly that that is how Putin and that is how Xi Jinping are actually approaching this thing. They're not just approaching it from some practical, pragmatic way, but they're approaching it from the a higher cultural standpoint. Okay, so now I'm going to be, when I'm done, Dave Christie's going to do something, and I forgot to tell you that in the beginning, but so the other aspect of the Turkish development is that it has a potential to tremendously influence Europe. You have the whole refugee issue tied up in this. If Turkey and Russia and Syria and Iran work together, then you end the refugee issue. And that is something that Europe has to orient towards it for their own survival. It also opens a door for Europe. But the key is Germany, because they still have something of an economic potential left. So now we come to the situation in the United States and in Canada. Now, this development in Turkey is of such extraordinary strategic potential, threatening the future of our values forever, that you're going to see most likely an all-out effort to get a hot war going in Ukraine. And we have a situation where Canadian troops have always been the spear on this kind of thing, and that is what you have now. Canadian troops are on the contact line. They're doing the training, they're doing special ops, and they are also doing the command and control aspect. So you're moving into a much more confrontational situation in Ukraine with operations designed to penetrate Russian territory like Crimea, perhaps the border with Russia, to provoke Russia. And so this is an escalation. And
Sorry, can you explain what you mean by spear?
yeah, when you go and attack somebody, you put certain people up front to break through, and that's the spear. And I got a history lesson on this earlier. Canadian troops have always been used in World War I, World War II, as the point to go in and attack. And behind, and then other troops come in behind. And that's what I mean by spear, whether it was the Korean War or that's what I mean by point, spear point. They have a history of being the toughest point on the spear, and they're being placed in command positions in Ukraine on the contact lines, and Canadian Defense Secretary, or Defense Minister, what's his name, Harjit? Sajjan, is now saying that Canada is no longer going to do the usual peacekeeping. They're going to do a lot more. They're going to get a lot more involved in military activity all over the world. Much more than Harper ever imagined. And this is all part of the shift that's going on, where they're freaking out. And I'm expecting, now the financial situation is also causing some freakouts. And Deutsche Bank is facing bankruptcy. Prominent, one of the most prominent economists has called for, Martin Hellwig has called for the nationalization of Deutsche Bank. And so you have this process going on. Now, in the United States, you have Hillary, the champion of our values. And you have Donald Trump, the champion of the people who hate our values. And that appears to be what Donald Trump is about. He's about ring fencing the natural hatred that people have now in the United States, the ones who don't subscribe to our values. They hate our values, the political correctness, etc., etc., etc. And so I see him as ring fencing them, not really leading them to an actual solution, but ring fencing them. You know, like Volcker wants to ring fence the financial crisis. And that's a wrong analogy, perhaps. But that's what he's doing. He's ring fencing to contain and perhaps even misdirect this rage. And this rage is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Now, whether that rage can be converted into a kind of fascism, I don't know. But the our values crowd are inherently fascist as well, but in a totally culturally degenerate way. So this is what you're dealing with. The only way that you're going to deal with this crisis in the United States is from our ability in Manhattan and elsewhere to bring in a new paradigm, which is neither reactionary nor degenerate, because it's reactionary and degenerate. You have reactionary and degenerate. That's how this thing is worked. The fundamentalist, reactionary, and degenerate. Okay, and George Soros, degenerate. And so. And that includes the whole green issue as well. You can throw that in there as well. It's partly degenerate and partly fundamentalist, you know. But that's what you're dealing with. But I cannot. But I'm not really describing this properly. The incredible optimism that's now spreading throughout the Middle East, from Asia, that's spreading throughout Southeast Asia. You see it in the Philippines. This guy's taking no prisoners. You see it in different places. You see this optimism emerging. The sense that humanity is not totally corrupt, is not totally degenerate. You know, and the degeneracy in these other nations is the difference between a degeneracy of the corruption that exists in other nations and the degeneracy of the our values crowd is one has no sense of shame. The other, in these other countries, they have a sense of shame. They feel shame for their corruption, but they go ahead anyhow. Because that's a cultural difference. A sense of shame versus no sense of shame. And you go to Mexico, it's incredible what's happened to Mexico. The traditional society, the traditional culture has been devastated. The sexual promiscuity in the population has gone up 1,000,000% among the younger people. The Pentecostal religion has taken over from the Catholic Church. I mean, Mexico is a good example of this process. I mean, it's in the drug lords rule. That's Mexico. That was a culture where 30 years ago, 40 years ago, this would be unthinkable. Italy, the seat of Catholicism, has the lowest birth rate in the world. 40 years ago, it had one of the highest. What happened? What happened? The men stay with their mothers. The women go to work, don't have a family. What happened? The new our values crowd. My personal life, my personal values, my personal pleasures. That's what you're dealing with. But there is a lot of people who don't subscribe to that, and they feel abused, they feel destroyed. But outside of this area, the optimism that's now starting to spread cannot be, but coming out of this meeting between Putin, Aliyev, and Rouhani on August 10th in Baku, and the development of this corridor that goes from Iran all the way to Scandinavia is awesome. The sense of we're going to build a future is coming very big, and it's going to come here. And as this degenerate system fractures, we have to vector in the new paradigm. So I didn't intend to talk very long. I wanted Dave to talk to you, and I wanted, he's going to do a presentation on the catenary. So I'm going to open it up for questions.
Will you say something about the G20 summit that's coming up?
Oh yeah, I didn't mention the detail. I should have. Okay, this is beautiful. I looked up the G20 summit, and then I looked at this thing that Helga was at called the T20 summit, which was a week ago. And the key speaker was speaking in English, and he was saying, the economy is sluggish. Monetary and fiscal policy don't work.
It's not enough.
Not enough. Not enough. Now, what's he saying? We have this T20 meeting of 500 people. Helga and Bill Jones were there, talking about how you're going to deal with what? The sluggish economy? No. The systemic collapse of the system. That's what they're talking about. So now, how do these things work? Obama shows up, Prime Minister of Canada shows up, he's in the G20, other people show up, and they photo ops and all this stuff. And before they even talk, they make an agreement that they're not going to talk about things. They don't want to talk about certain things. So it's already set up. Now, I have a feeling, and I could be wrong, the Chinese aren't going to do that. And what that means is they're going to raise all the issues. Maybe not in this way, as provocative or confrontational a way as we are, but perhaps so. But you're sitting there, you're the president of a nation, you're the president of a G20 country, and you're sitting there and you're having to deal with the fact that they're discussing the economic situation. What response are you going to make? Are you going to say, well, I disagree. I think everything's fine. We're growing. We in the West are doing great. We in the United States are doing great. We in Europe are doing great. You know, your economy's collapsing. Our economy's growing. Are they going to? I mean, they can't get away with that. So what are they going to do? They're trapped. Because if you have a real dialogue, not some pre-agreed, you know, thing. You have a real dialogue about what the crisis is. All the countries are there. If you decide not to allow them to escape. And then the Chinese say they're planning to have 30 concrete results from the meeting. Well, what concrete results are they talking about? And then comes the United Nations meeting on the 13th to the end of. And that's where Putin came and made a call to all the nations to work together to end this, our values, terrorist program. So, and now, who's supporting terrorism? Even Donald Trump is saying that Hillary is that Obama is the cause of ISIS, and Hillary is the what?
Founder.
Co-founder.
Co-founder, yeah.
I mean, where did he get that? I mean, it's kind of off, but where did he get that from? Huh?
It's basically true.
It is basically true.
Does it have a negative effect when he says it, though?
Huh?
Does it have a negative effect when he says it?
I have no idea what effect it's having, but it's not. He's missing one. He's missing one. QUEEN. He's missing the QUEEN. Anyhow.
Well, actually, Paul, if I can say one thing on this, because you know, you have all these neocons who have all stepped forward and endorsed Hillary, right? Kagan, wife or husband of Newland, take your pick. Founder of the Project for New American Century, this guy Mike Morrell that just came out, the former CIA, you know, top guy at the CIA, who basically said we have to start killing Russians and Syrians to, you know, to make a point, just like the Iranians killed our people and showed pain. We have to show pain to them now, and just psycho Nazi stuff, right? And these are the guys that are coming out blasting Trump. Now, are they really going after Donald Trump? Are they really concerned that Donald Trump is going to be the guy that can deliver on all this, or that he's actually serious? No. What they're doing is they're going after Trump because what Trump is doing is he represents this revolt against our values. You know, the fact that in both the Democratic and Republican Party platform and the Green Party platform, you have Glass-Steagall as a policy. You have the call for the 28 pages coming from both the parties, right? You have what he says around getting rid of NATO and ties with Russia and so on. That's what not just the American people want, but the layers within the institution of the presidency who represent the better side of both the Democratic and Republican Party, who really don't identify with the parties per se, but identify with the patriotic mission of the United States. And the threat by these neocons against Trump is really the threat against these, or the verbalized threats are more of a threat to the institution of the presidency. Don't you dare go with these policies. We'll shame you that this is Donald Trump, even though, not Donald Trump, he didn't make the Glass-Steagall the issue, he didn't make the 28 pages. What they're really freaked out is that Lynn will take a commanding role within the institution of the presidency, policy-wise, you know, and whatever dialogue. So I think a lot of this is just...
They're afraid of the dialogue that will occur to deal with the financial crisis. You know, they're afraid of the dialogue that will occur to why is it that Russia's fighting terrorism and we're not, you know, et cetera, et cetera. They're afraid of all of that. They're afraid of everything. Their whole thing is coming down, and they really are freaked out about Putin, because Putin is providing the basis for all of this. Not because Putin is giving money to all these people, but because Putin is providing the context.
Well, if I could just make a comment too, because, you know, to both of your points, I challenge you to actually listen to what Donald Trump is saying, and I'll tell you why, because What Trump is saying is half bullshit, and the other half, though, that he's saying is he is making, he's voicing things that a year ago or 2 years ago were only in conspiracy land but were actually true. He is actually saying things that are true in the American context, not, of course, in the big picture, but for the American people.
Right.
And so that's how he's taking those layers that are sick of our values and all of that. He is actually activating. It may not be a full activation, and it's certainly not a Renaissance kind of activation, but he is activating the side of them that subconsciously knows that this whole thing is bullshit.
Right, but it can be turned into a completely reactionary aspect.
Of course it
and
can.
that's,
Of course
that's
it can.
there,
Yes.
and that's the issue.
Right, but we're not quite there yet.
No.
So which way will it go? And they're trying to
Right,
divert it.
right, and would Trump turn it into that at a certain point? Or would he be able to? I don't know if he'd be able to. I don't know. Go ahead.
There is change coming, no question. And I think looking back in history, the beginning of every century had this kind of situation, where something new coming and the status quo is fighting back. The price for that was 2 world wars in the last century. We are not going to have a disciplined
Transition.
change from one to the other. Changes, we call it in physics, change can happen being amorphous, where you have a mixture of the old and the new together, and that's to some extent what we have now. It's an amorphous situation where you have some from here and some from there, and the struggle is going on. But that's not always the case. There's other situations where you have a phase of change that is violent and it could be destructive, like explosion. An explosion is one of those phase changes where you have a huge destructive power. That's what happened last century with 2 world wars. What's going to happen now, I don't know. I don't think anybody can tell. But it is not going to be a nice ordinary change from the old to the new. They are not going to disappear, or they are not going to listen and accept the new phase coming in. They will have to resist, and we have to understand that. They will have to resist, and they are going to resist till the last minute. And they could tell me why.
But they who are going to resist, okay, here's where I have a different take than you do. Okay. How does the empire hold together? Well, there's 2 ways. One is the our values, but those values do not create cohesion. And they do not create trust. They do not create empathy. So the whole thing right now is being held together by power and fear, and confidence, and perception. When you destroy that perception, when you destroy that whole thing, then the internal power within that system disintegrates, and the people who run that system will not be able to control the collapse of their auxiliaries, the collapse of their within. And what Putin is doing, what we're doing, which is similar, is we're attacking their sense of confidence in their power. And the Turkey development is a huge blow to the confidence of their power. And when they lose their confidence, then they're like disoriented. And and when you go into battle,
That's when they become very dangerous.
yes, that's when they become very dangerous
That's the
too.
word. Because they might become a tiger, a paper tiger, as they say,
Yeah,
but this is a paper
Right.
tiger with nuclear weapons.
yes,
So this is the point.
This is
So
the
my
point.
point that I'm trying to make is that trying to rectify the system from within is not possible. The system cannot be corrected from within. This system we have here has to collapse.
It will collapse.
It has to collapse and it will
It
collapse.
has
and
to
it
be
will collapse
replaced.
violently. It's not going to
But there
collapse.
is something there to replace it.
Well, yeah, well, but that's external. This is a problem.
Could
Go
I
ahead.
add one thing, Dr. Sandy? We had one of our top DC contacts, and he's somebody who was supportive of Glass-Steagall and so on, right? Now, when, before he made the statement that I will say in a second, we had another one of our top contacts, somebody who was previously with the Clinton administration, who went to England for some kind of seminar, right? And she was talking to an official, I believe it was the Bank of England, or no, it was the British Treasury Department. Whatever.
Exchequer,
Yeah.
the Exchequer.
I don't know, it was out of that office. And they said that the British view Glass-Steagall as a casus belli, as a, act of war.
Really?
An act of war against
Yeah.
against the British.
And this one, she was just like, what? Banking reform is an act of war? And she expressed that later. Now, later, one of our top DC contacts, we decided to find out, like, all right, you're for Glass-Steagall, but do you really know what Glass-Steagall is going to do? And he said that, he goes, I know what Glass-Steagall will do. It'll be the greatest transition of power since Jesus Christ brought down the Roman Empire. So I think it can come like that, and it may not be explosions from us, or we may not see the bombs going off, but from the standpoint of the city of London and Wall Street and Frankfurt and the whole, they know this is the end of them. So
Wow.
there's a way where the explosion, I think, can occur,
I'm looking not for an explosion or an implosion. I'm looking for a positive thing like the 1648 Peace of Westphalia. It defeated the empire, the entire empire system. We had 100 years of war, and it was defeated with a scientific idea, with Kepler coming in, creating a sense of the value of the human being being able to see what the eye cannot see, bringing science onto the table to change the entire parameter, although he didn't live long enough to see the end of it. But I think Kepler sort of materialized the 1648, the turnaround towards the 1648 Peace of Westphalia, where they all of a sudden said, the hell with this crap, we'll have something better to do. We're humanity, we can treat each other as human beings. The only thing that's missing in our world is the Kepler, the Kepler component. But it's there, it's in China, it's in Russia, it's probably also in the USA suppressed. So I think it's a positive thing that will change the world rather than implosion or explosion. What do you think?
Or they come together. They're together. The development that we're talking about, it comes hand in hand with the other. Because we discovered this a long time ago. Whenever we put forward proposals and we found support for those proposals, the hammer came down. Indira Gandhi went to prison, and then later Indira Gandhi was assassinated. Sukarno, same thing. Nkrumah, and we could go on and on. Even Bhutto of Pakistan. So yeah, it goes hand in hand. But right now you have a concert of power. This is the hard part that I'm having trouble even understanding myself. China and Russia together, and India still has not been fully brought in. They represent power. It's not Lopez Portillo of Mexico trying to organize Brazil and Argentina to form a debtors cartel along with Lyndon LaRouche as an advisor. It's not Indira Gandhi trying to do something similar. It's not the Japanese trying to, back in the late 70s before the Plaza Accords, trying to get development going. No, this is different. This has power. This has force behind it. This has nuclear weapons behind it, the Russian nuclear weapons, and Chinese nuclear weapons. This is not the same thing. This is not a, this is a very different thing. I mean, all those things were important leading up to this, but this is power. And it is now going to crush through a process of collapsing the financial system, of the collapse of the financial system and a recruitment process. It's going to crush this empire. And the thing we have to worry about is not to allow a nuclear war to occur. And that's the issue. That's an issue of timing. It's an issue of tactics and strategy and so forth. And this is where Putin has to be very careful. He and the Chinese, they have to organize to make sure that it's done in a manner that doesn't lead to nuclear war. Which means they have to be very flexible. They have to be able to offer deals. You know, they have to be able to do, you know, all kinds of ways.
I just don't see Turkey the way you're describing it.
Who?
Turkey. From what I've read, I don't see that Erdogan is, I feel like he could double cross anybody at any time.
Yes.
I don't see
Okay.
that as a,
Yeah, but that's in the old paradigm. We're coming into a new paradigm.
Iran and Turkey are on the table to talk.
Yeah, but I'm saying that kind of thing is what you could expect from him as a matter of due course. But he's entering a different paradigm. I had this discussion earlier. You're entering a new paradigm, which makes it different. It's not that Erdogan's different, it's that he's now responding to a new paradigm. That's what I'm saying. And I could be wrong. Who knows what he could do. But he's responding to a new paradigm. But I know one thing, perhaps, about Erdogan. He's not with our values crowd. He may be criminal, he may be corrupt, but he's not with the our values crowd. He doesn't represent the our values crowd. And he does have support in the population. And if he wants to keep that support in the population, sufficient to keep his power, this is the direction he has to take. I mean, I'm going to say this, I could be wrong, that the people of that part of the world do follow what's going on. They do understand what's going on. They do read between the lines. They do know what the British Empire is. They do know all this stuff. They know, but they can't do anything about it because it's all locked into the system that nobody can do anything about. But now they see this China thing. They see the BRICS. They see Russia and China together. They see all this stuff happening. They're going, whoa! This is blowing my mind. I've never heard, I could not imagine anything like this would be possible. This goes against everything that we assume is how things work. And they're going, wow, is there really some hope? Is there really potential? And Erdogan is in the middle of all that. Meanwhile, he's looking at the system collapsing, and he's looking at them trying to kill him at the same time. You know, do they need Erdogan? Okay, I don't trust, do you trust Erdogan? No. Does Obama trust Erdogan? No. Do you want somebody that you can't trust? Of this culture. These are traditional cultures. They are not perfect. They are somewhat imperfect, quite imperfect. But there is a resistance to this from these cultures.
And there's a direction and hope in those cultures still.
Yes, centered around family and centered around what have you. So in these cultures, so when the communist system collapsed, you couldn't spread this to the whole world. But what you could do is you could take and begin to organize the backward people, but most importantly the degenerate people, into these religious fundamentalism and then try to use it as a battering ram. And more importantly, you can take historical issues between these different cultures and try to inflame them. Whether it's Shia versus Sunni, whether it's Turks versus Russian, whether it's Vietnamese versus Chinese, whatever it is, right? And so at the time that the wall came down, at the time that communism ended, you had something developed called the Clash of Civilizations. This is Bertrand Russell and Samuel Huntington. And what they said is that while communism is gone, we now have to deal with a world of different cultural paradigms in collision, in conflict. And now that's not true, but that was the face of the propaganda. But what they really meant was we're going to cultivate terrorism on a mass scale and set all this into motion. Because that cultural degeneration occurred, there was a counter-reaction to that cultural degeneration from the population, which is being destroyed by the cultural degeneration, and their counter-reaction was vectored into religious fundamentalism. So you have the cultural degeneration, and then you have religious fundamentalism coming side by side. Okay, now the idea of this cultural degeneration is that we don't need to have progress. We don't need to be productive. We just have to have pleasure. And there are no restraints. Okay, and today you see this in the culture of the hedge fund managers, crack cocaine, all the way. You see it in the political, system. You see where people are just putting in their time as politicians, but they're spending the other part of their time in their entertainment and pursuits. And the idea is there should be no impediment to you doing whatever you want to do, whatever drugs you want to take, whatever sexual orientation you want to have, or whatever changing sexual orientation you want to have, as you might wish. It's all a big smorgasbord of experience. And when Angela Merkel used the term "our values," and when Obama uses the term "our values," that's what they mean by our values. They mean our values. Our values. Okay? Okay, they mean freedom. This is what George Soros means by an open society. Freedom. Freedom. And anyone, yeah, that's what they mean. Now, however, outside of primarily North America, outside of Europe, there are certain impediments to the spread of this cultural degeneration, because this is the empire. This is the idea of Fukuyama, idea of the end of history. That the world is now finally has one culture, a neoliberal economics and cultural freedom. the full liberation of humanity from the tyranny of the future, the tyranny of reason, and the tyranny of having to do good. It's all a world of competition, lust for power, lust for money, lust for sex, lust for entertainment. That's our world. That's the universal new world that we are now in. The brave new world, whatever you want to call it. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is the negative, is the people who are destroyed in that become then material for the fundamentals. So you have the two things going on side by side. Now, however, the Russian Orthodox culture that's emerging after the fall of the communist system, the emerging Confucian Chinese culture, and also Muslim society in general, represent an impediment to the spread on a mass scale, beginning right after the war, going into the 50s, and then going into the rock, drug, sex, counterculture in the 60s, of cultural depravity and cultural degeneracy. And the leading institution of this in the transatlantic region was called the Congress of Cultural Freedom. And they promoted the most decadent music, the most decadent art, the most decadent literary that they could. I won't even go into what I read when I was 12, 13 years old, 14, 15 years old. It was very decadent. And this was what was coming in. Now, this cultural decadence appealed to the worst instincts in people. Sexual pleasure, psychedelic experiences, entertainment, completely away from the earlier culture, you might say, which was oriented towards progress, a better future for your children, doing something worthwhile with your life, doing something productive. That culture was smothered in waves and further waves and further waves of cultural degeneracy. And the spread of this cultural degeneration escalated after the financial system was taken down in 1971. So money became the primary goal, and money and more money and so forth. And as welcome to the B.C. LaRouche chapter Saturday meeting, the 13th of August. And tonight we're going to go deeper into the implications of the development of a major shift that's going on in Turkey, coming out of the meetings that occurred in St. Petersburg, and now the meeting between Turkey and Iran. But I'm going to go deep on this. I'm not going to deal with just what they did or didn't do. I'm going to go deeper into the deeper issue. Okay. Now, you have to have this perspective. During World War II, there was an awesome economic mobilization. And at the end of World War II, the United States was the most powerful economy in the world. But Canada was the third most powerful economy in the world. That's how much industrial power existed in the small area, population-wise, of Canada. And it was connected to the industrial transformation of the United States, but it was. Now, what happened in this period from the end of World War II, and the process of dismantling that productive power. And the whole transformation that's occurred since 1945, 71 years, has to be looked at in the context of the developments that have occurred coming out of the shift that's taking place in Turkey. Now, what happened after the war was there was a promotion